Dorothy, thanks so much for joining me today to talk about the International DLD Research Conference. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It looks like it's going to be great fun.
So we're really excited to have you as one of our keynotes, launching our first day of the conference. Can you tell people a little bit about your keynote and I guess what it's about?
Yeah, it was a great opportunity to really think back over the very many years I've been working on DLD. And I wanted to focus on why it tends to go unrecognized. And I mean, I think that the DLD project and other activities across the world have really managed to put it a bit more on the map, but it's still under-recognized. And it fascinates me as to why that's the case. Why, if you go to a man in the street or a woman in the street, they know about autism, they know about dyslexia, but they don't know about DLD. And so I just discussing a whole range of different things about it that might be responsible, including things like, the professional boundaries and the way that other conditions tend to be seen by medics and with a very medical model. DLD is much more complicated because of the importance of language and education, as well as people who take a more medical aspect. And often they don't really seem to interact very well or talk to each other. And then you get things like people tend to think every child has just got one diagnosis. So you get what I call diagnostic overshadowing. If you get a child who turns up and gets a diagnosis of, say, ADHD, people don't think to look at language. Or there's plenty of evidence that children who turn up in child psychiatry clinics often have undiagnosed language problems. But because their behavior is what draws your attention, then they get missed. The language problems always get missed unless unless you explicitly sort of go out looking for them and try to assess them. And I think another point is that they get missed because they don't draw attention to themselves. If you've got a comprehension problem, you can sit in the back of the classroom and nobody will realize just how little you may be understanding of what's going on around you. Yeah. And even with kids who sort of persist into the school years, or adults who have measurable problems with expressive language, they don't necessarily sound weird at that age. It doesn't draw attention to itself. It's just when you sit and analyze it, you realize they are using limited vocabulary, maybe struggling for words, and maybe using sort of fairly simple sentence structures. So I think those are the points I'm trying to bring out, is sort of a whole host of different reasons, partly to do with DLD itself and partly to do with which professions are involved with it, that tend to mean that it gets overlooked. And that will be the main focus of what I'm talking about.
Fantastic. And I'm so excited to be talking about this because we know that DLD is often, a part of the puzzle, and there are going to be other things co-occurring with that. But unless we're looking for it, thinking about language, thinking about DLD, we're not actually going to go finding it. So hopefully it'll be a fresh reminder for people. We've got people registering already and lots more probably thinking about it. What information or learning do you hope people will take away from your keynote when they attend?
Well, there's a small part of the talk where I'm going way back in time. And this was, for me, quite funny because I was reading my own papers that I haven't read, for 20 years.
Wow.
Does this still hold up? But there is information in there which I think does hold up about outcomes and how children change over time and how the presentation of DLD changes over time, and about relationship with literacy problems in particular. So the question is, people have thought that maybe you start with an oral language problem and then later on you develop a literacy problem and have trouble learning to read. But actually what we showed, and I think others have now shown, is that the language problems are rumbling along underneath the surface for these kids. So it's not that every child with a diagnosis of, say, dyslexia has got problems with oral language as well, but a lot of them do, and again, they get missed. So I'll talk a bit about that literature and a bit about other studies looking at things like these co-occurrence of disorders. But it's a mixture. So the talk is a bit of a mixture of some empirical evidence, which is very old, and also it's just some of my reflections on how I think, things that we perhaps should be looking at that haven't been looked at, like we almost need a sociology of the study of DLD, looking at what are these factors that influence why some conditions people study and some conditions they don't. And I'm hoping I might inspire some people to perhaps start new lines of research into those sort of questions.
Yeah, and certainly one of my all-time favorite articles is yours around which neurodevelopmental conditions get researched and why.
Yeah.
Such an aha moment for me when it was published. What now, 12 years ago, something like that.
2010
Yeah. Yeah, and then of course Carla McGregor's updated that
yes.
piece, and
Yeah.
still, not much has changed. So really important questions.
Yeah.
So thinking about this International DLD Research Conference, why do you think an event like this is important?
Oh, wow. It's incredibly important precisely because DLD hasn't had events like this. Why not? Again, there have been events for other conditions, but DLD has only recently, in recent years, had the kind of event where you bring together people across the different countries, which often have their own funny little idiosyncratic ways of doing things. And, in the past, different labels would be used. And again, barriers to communication. And also because I think you have more of an emphasis across the whole age range, and because you involve people who themselves, have DLD. And so it's really not a sort of, exclusively sort of highfalutin academic conference. It's something that I think brings together everyone who's really interested in this.
So Dorothy, what would you say to someone who is thinking about coming along to IDLDRC? Maybe they haven't bought their ticket yet.
Well, of course, I would say come.
Please do.
It's going to be the thing, be there or be square, as we used to say. So I think, seriously, I mean, the keynotes are nicely complementary as well. I think all the topics covered by the three keynotes you've carefully selected so that there's something for everyone. And I think I'm really looking forward to it. And there's opportunities for Q&A as well and interactions. So I think it really is part of the movement to, bring about the change I'm hoping to see, which is to get DLD much more widely recognized. But I think if you're somebody who's either, interested in DLD because your child you think might have DLD, or because you're a professional working with this group and you feel a bit isolated because nobody's ever heard of it, this is the place to come to get, a sense of your community.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's it. It's all about, and I think that's what we believe at the DLD project, it's about bringing people together and building a community for those people in Australia, but around the world. And this is one of those amazing opportunities to do so. So Dorothy, thank you so much for agreeing to be our keynote for the 2022 IDLDRC. We are so excited to have you. I think I've said that about 3 or 4 times now, and it gets truer every time. Please come along and listen to Dorothy's keynote, join her for her live Q&A session, and learn more about DLD. Dorothy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sean.